Hello, everyone. Thanks for waiting a few extra minutes. We're starting just a touch after 4 p.m. Fiji time. So I'd like to welcome you all to our last Language Matters in the Pacific seminar for the semester, and thank you all for joining us today. So before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. Could you check that your microphones are all turned off and that you're muted throughout this session unless you're presenting? But you can feel free to write in the chat at any time, and we will have question time at the end of the session as well. So now we're nearly 3 years into the UN's International Decade of Indigenous Languages, which explicitly identifies the fundamental relationship between conservation and language. So today we have a fantastic panel lined up for you who will be considering this topic for our local contexts, talking about language conservation in Oceania. So today's moderator is our colleague Martha Stevens, who's a teacher and researcher at the Oceania Centre for Arts, Culture and Pacific Studies here at USP, and I'll hand it over to Martha now.
Thank you, Dr. Harriet. Bulavinaka, and welcome everyone to another session of the webinar series Language Matters in the Pacific. Today, our topic will be on Indigenous languages and conservation in Oceania. To begin with, I will begin with an introduction of a short biography of the panelists. And then we will move on into an introduction, and we will begin our conversation with questions to the panelists, and we'll follow up from there. To begin with, before we introduce the panelists, I would just like to offer apologies from the Regional Director Oceania for the IUCN, Leo Tuala Tango, who is unable to join us today due to issues with connectivity from her location in the region. Our first panelist lined up is Anne Singel who is the executive director of the Abil Society Incorporated in and this she became the executive director in January 2011. She's also the co-founder of Abil Society, and she served on the board of directors from 2007 to 2010. She was a graduate of the University of Texas at El Paso with a master's in communication for social change. She also works with communities to initiate innovative solutions that promote sustainable resources for livelihood support. She has acquired a diverse work experience from various management positions, such as an executive director for Palau Primary Healthcare, the chief for Palau's gender division, and is a private consultant in the local and regional area of the Pacific. She's a wide range of publications, which include the UNESCO EIU Award, winning a monogram for Camp Abil, Cultivating Indigenous Knowledge Towards the Environmental Conservation, the Palau Cultural Mapping with the Secretariat of the Pacific Community, and with UNESCO Palau Knowledge of the Sea, Palau Mese Epistemology, Palau Intangible Cultural Heritage, Palau Gender and Natural Resource, 2020, and various environmental papers, including women fisheries. Our next panelist lined up is none other than Captain Aunofohave Funaki Satuala from Tua Anuku Makave Okovavau and Uiha Hapai. She is a full-time mom and a voyager. She became the first woman captain to be licensed for the Kingdom of Tonga. She's a member of Whales, Whispers, and Real Moana. She is also the president for the Tonga Voyaging Society, as well as the Vava'u Volunteer Maritime Responses Association. She's also the owner of Waka and Moana Whale Swim, Ne'afau Vava'u, Tonga. Our third panelist for today, who is currently running a bit late due to issues, technical issues, is none other than Salaniata Kitalele, hailing from Rewa in Fiji. She's a postdoctoral researcher for the Sockbeck Pacific Project, Leibniz Center for Marine Research, Bremen, Germany. She is an indigenous social scientist and has taught at the University of the South Pacific and Japan. Salaniata is a seasoned researcher working in the indigenous knowledge space in Fiji, and her work in communities lead her on a continuous journey of learning from indigenous and local knowledge of the community. Her work in the community also allows her to engage with people from all walks of life, and she's also a member of the Rewa think tank, providing advice to the Rewa Province Biodiversity Committee. All the way from Aotearoa, our final presenter and panelist for today, Dr. Ramari Stewart, is a Tohunga Tohora, which is a whale expert, and her experience spans decades. She is of the Ngatiawa and was born and raised in Te Horo near Ohope, Aotearoa. She was awarded the Honorary Doctor of Science from Waipapa Taumatarau, University of Auckland. She has extensive knowledge of forest and ocean, and as her upbringing by her elders, is committed to indigenous Maori knowledge and science practices surrounding whales. The discovery of an elusive beak whale recently has led to the new species being named after her. And this is an honor that has been, in the past, has been usually bestowed to male Western scientists. A very warm welcome again to our esteemed panelists with from a wide range of experience in the indigenous space and conservation. Moving on, the webinar today, as I had mentioned, is focusing on indigenous languages and conservation in Oceania. And the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, as Dr. Harriet has mentioned, spans from 2022 to 2032, and it affirms the fundamental relationship between indigenous languages and conservation. The output 7 of the decade's global action plan, it focuses on establishing an enabling environment. And this is specifically for indigenous languages, thereby contributing to biodiversity conservation, climate change adaptation and mitigation, ecosystems management, land restoration, improving the marine and coastal environment, reducing natural hazards, preventing pollution, and managing water resources. In Oceania, the planet's most linguistically rich region, languages and cultural diversity, they are essential to just effective and lasting conservation. However, currently with English and French as the dominant languages of conservation policy and programming, it is not always very clear on how enabling environment for indigenous languages is being fostered in the region. This panel discussion, therefore, will explore this question through examples of work taking place in different parts of Oceania. So our first question, which is directed as a general question to all the panelists, and we will begin with Anne and move on to Aunofo and Ramari and Sala later on. My question is, for you, what are some of the most important elements of language as they relate to biodiversity and biocultural diversity? Thank you. And could you lead us with a discussion from your experience with that question?
Thank you. Thank you, Maha, for the question and the introduction. In our experience working at ABIL and teaching children and youth on environmental education, it is so critical that we prioritize the integration and use of the indigenous language when describing space, biodiversity, and the relationship between human and the natural world. In the Palauan language, a lot of the names for the species are actually describing a behavior or a character of the species in relation to the natural environment. An example would be birds. For instance, Armelaul, which is one of our endemic bird species, with a common name as the Palawan flycatcher. And the difference between the two names, one is make it seem like the bird eats flies in the English name, whereas in the indigenous name, Armelaul means the rain bird. And that's because the bird whistles to signal rain before it comes. And so the relationship of the species and the way that they were named and their role and function in our ecosystem, complete ecosystem, makes more sense when you teach using the indigenous name than it does when you're using the English name. And this is just one example of the many different ways in which the language emphasizes the critical role and function of a species within the ecosystem versus using the adapted Western influenced names.
Thank you very much, Anne, for that very insightful look into the relationship between bird species as well as language. And I really am quite empowered by your conversation on how language emphasizes the role of species, and how using another language sort of what waters down the meaning of the role of the species to the environment. Thank you very much, Anne. Moving on, we move on to Captain Aunofo. Captain Aunofo, if you could talk about your experiences on the main question that I've asked before, on the most important elements of language as they relate to biodiversity and biocultural diversity in your area of work. Captain Aunofo, are you able to, you're still muted? Thank you.
Vinaka Vakalemo, thank you very much, Malo Apito, for this great opportunity, and then feel so honored to be involved with all the professionals, women's of the regions, about to share. I think my experience, and that's what I love about this, is not like straight, it just come from experience and what I've been doing for many years. So to come back for your questions, as Dr. Anne was already mentioned, so that we have a similar things about in Tonga. We all know that biocultural diversity is interacting natural system and human culture. Also provide innovating way to coping with the impacts of global trends such as climate change and all the different kinds of life you will find in one area. So like the variety of animals, plants, and microorganisms like bacteria that make up our natural world. Each of these species and organisms work together in ecosystem to maintain the balance and supporting life. Over here, like culture, we have a lot of things to talk about that, about the crucial elements of connecting biodiversity and bioculture diversity is restoring of TK culture and identity of TK is mean the traditional knowledge, culture and identity, and that's what most I do on my voyaging is like about communication with natural world, and then compare it for what we're doing on the Waka. As a preservations of knowledge, language are not just tools for our communication, but play a lot of role to the transmission of cultural knowledge, including TEK, traditional ecological knowledge. Also, we pass down the traditional knowledge that I know to the young generations and all the crew that I've been training for many years, to understand how important the culture and then how important the traditional knowledge and the plants, animal species in their place with the ecosystems. We also provide means of expressing cultural value, belief, and connection to the natural world. Language can be facilitates the exchange of knowledge between the scientists and traditional perspective. That's what of the things we're doing. We have to be aligned and work together with the scientists and traditional perspective to come up with a clear visions of what we've been doing and then what I've been doing out at sea. Also, research can gain a richer understanding of biodiversity in the culture of significance. Considerable scientists and traditional knowledge can lead to more inclusive and effective conservation strategy. Importance of indigenous language, traditional knowledge is very important to often contain rich knowledge about local biodiversity and ecosystems. Word is unique, recognizing and valuing indigenous language. If loss of language, for me, can also lead to the loss of culture identity.
Thank you. Thank you, Captain Onofo, for your very interesting and riveting discussion on the connections, on the crucial connections between culture and nature, and also the crucial connections between culture, language, and conservation, and the work that you are doing on the Waka to link the two and teach our younger generation these skills and tools in terms of preservation of cultural knowledge. Thank you. I will move on to Salnieta Kitalile, Bulvinaka Sala. Glad that you are on board, and we are currently having a conversation around the question of the most important elements of language as they relate to biodiversity and biocultural diversity from your perspective and from the work that you're doing. Vinaka Sala.
Pulvinaka Mata and everyone listening in today. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge all the elders and everyone who's present today. And with my work, line of work, and also I think language, the diversity that is there, diversity not only in the language, but also the different dialects that we have. That is an important element of our culture itself, because it holds a lot of knowledge and wisdom around the environment. And for us in the Pacific, our connections are deeply rooted in our language and also our culture, because everything, we are closely linked to the environment. And so if there's a lot of things which are held, a lot of secrets and a lot of knowledge held within our language. I'll give an example in the biodiversity, biological diversity, which is around us, the plants and the animals. In a lot of places I've been to across Fiji, we have different names for the different plants, and whereas the scientific side of things, if we are to identify a plant universally, we use the Latin name, so that it makes it easy to identify the plants all over the world. But then for us in the Pacific and in other parts who have indigenous knowledge all over the world, the diversity in our language and culture helps us identify biodiversity, the plants and the animals around us, and the amount of the diversity in the names that we have. For example, if we have 10 names for coconuts, these are the different varieties. It helps us identify species. It helps us identify the uses and how useful that particular plant is to the culture. So that's a very important part of the work that I do. So in addition to going around documenting traditional knowledge around different species in the marine environment and all, I also go around learning about the different parts of the environment and how they related to the different communities. Because for a lot of communities, even though they have the same geographic settings and all, they still have that the uniqueness in their language and dialects, which makes them stand apart from other communities. So the language and the dialects that are present in those communities and the knowledge which surrounds it is something that helps in providing baseline information, particularly for science or people who want to do research in those areas. So I think that's an important part of language and the work that I do in conservation. Naka.
Pinakabakalevu Sala for your very interesting conversation and the panelists who have presented so far. You've given us a lot of things to think about, and we're just at the beginning of this conversation already, and there's so much wealth of information. And Sala, I liked what you talked about, the uniqueness of language, and you have highlighted as well the diversity and the uniqueness of our languages. That is why identifying them in our languages is very important for conservation for the different species as well. And thank you very much for sharing with us some of the work that that you are doing. Nakavalevu to all the panelists for your discussion on our question. Moving on, we move on to Dr. Ramari Stewart from Aotearoa. If you could answer the discussion, or you could talk about your perspective on the important elements of language as they relate to biodiversity and biocultural diversity. Thank you, Dr. Stewart.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you for this opportunity. And the previous speakers have really nailed it, and I just want to support what they have said. And that Indigenous language is essential for us to teach our own even. I spend a lot of time these days as an elder running wānanga on marae-based wānanga, which are study groups for our rangatahi, our younger people. Many of them have an academic background, which I don't have actually, but I have rubbed shoulders a lot and am involved in quite a few research projects, particularly in the past. But my main interest today is to help our people reconnect with the environment in a way not dissimilar to my time, which was as practitioners. We were harvesters, and as you all know, there was a huge language that went with that. So what I really want to say is, if none of that language survives, how can we teach our own, let alone inform academia? So the transmission of cultural knowledge is very dependent on it. The other thing I'd like to say, I think, is in terms that the terms, I find that a lot of the language that has survived around species is more about terms to describe behavior, unique characteristics of species, morphology, for example, a particular form, shape, or structure of a species, or skeleton even, habitat, seasonal variation, etc. It's not so much names, as people keep asking me for names for species. But when well, to quote an experience just a few days ago, I was watching a group of Hector's dolphins from the shoreline. And the first thing I'm looking for is their behaviour. And so the terms that leap into my mind are the terms that relate to that behaviour, which describe Hector's dolphin behaviour. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at it with it all. Kia ora.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart, for that very interesting discussion on the transmission of cultural knowledge, and specifically connecting and linking to what Salaniata had mentioned on terms surrounding species and the mannerisms and the behavior. Thank you for sharing the work on connections of language to the work that you're doing in conservation. Thank you, panelists, once again for addressing some very important issues and highlighting some very important concepts that you are engaging with in relation to your work. Concurrently, we are going to be moving on to follow up questions to the individual panelists on specific work that they are doing in their own countries. First of all, to Anne and what I would like us to have a conversation about is the work that you are doing on integrating culture and conservation in Palau. And that is through the camps for children and publishing of books, among other initiatives that you are involved in. The question is, how do you integrate language in this, and what do you see as further ways forward?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's more difficult not to integrate it. I think it would be even more challenging if we were to say teach environmental science or studies in Palau without the integration of the language and the culture. That would be more challenging, at least for me. But we teach in a manner where we explore all the different realm of a particular knowledge. So say fisheries, for instance, or when we teach about the ocean, we teach through the knowledge of fishery. And so we teach that relationship between the fisher and the ocean. and what we teach are the knowledge that surrounds that practice. So how does he plan to go out to fish? Well, he looks at the current, he looks at the tide, he looks at the lunar cycle, he looks at the plants that are his reference point for the type of species that is in the ocean. And then once we are in the ocean, then we get to explore and witness those knowledge that have been accumulated for thousands of years in an old culture that has been passed on for generations. And so we don't just teach about the ecosystem of, say, a coral reef, but we integrate the knowledge of a fisher through a fishing practice. And that's how we teach, by integrating those knowledge. The same goes for forestry. We may be teaching about forest ecology, but the students will have a group of teachers, so we team teach. So we'll have maybe a healer, and we'll have a person who is in botany, who will lead the class in the field. So while the students are learning about the relationship in this complete ecosystem, they are also learning how we access and use the resources to heal, to take care of one another. Because the way we teach about the environment is not solely on how to understand the natural ecosystem around the individual, but to help them recognize and develop their own relationship to the ocean or the forest, the natural world. This is how we integrate it. And in terms of research, we have a research class that targets high school students. And the class is co-designed and taught between myself and other partners in other universities. In the research approach is integrating both the traditional Palawan protocols of borrowing knowledge, which the Western academia refers to as research. And this so in this case, we are teaching them not just how to develop your own methodology and get the information that you need to answer your questions, but we're also teaching them how to go into a community, how to borrow knowledge from elders, how do you use the protocols of entering a space where you don't belong or you don't have relations? How do you establish the connection in when you are not necessarily a trusted member of the community? What kind of protocols do you have to follow to enter? So these are important traditional knowledge and practices of borrowing knowledge that we're incorporating into the research so that the students are better prepared to enter the Palau communities, different Palau communities, and learn from the elders. And so in the Western term, they like to use the word extraction, whereas for us in the Palawan language, we will use borrowing. But it comes with many different expressions and practices of that conveys respect for the individual, respect for the community where you're learning from, and with emphasis on reciprocity. A lot of times in the Western research dynamics, they like to use words like power dynamics. They also use words like extraction, and they use words like creating new knowledge. Whereas in the Palawan language, we would not be talking about the power dynamics, but we will be emphasizing reciprocity between the researcher and the community, reciprocity between the researcher and the individuals, the elders from whom they're learning from, they're borrowing knowledge from. So the way that we're teaching the students is to come in with a foot on humility, on respect, on the knowledge that without these elders, you have nothing to learn from. You have limited foundations for learning. So, and then as we're doing this research, we are making intentional, we intentionally use the Palawan language to describe those relationships and the name of species and the Palawan practices of fishery for the purpose of preserving that knowledge and practice around the ocean. But some of the things that come up as a result of this research that puts clarity on the importance of why we need to preserve the indigenous language when we're teaching that relation to the natural resource or even resource management is I use an example of the word conservation. In the current the traditional fishery research that the students are conducting in the Palaus communities, we come to recognize that there is this misconception of the word conservation amongst the Palauan people who use the ocean. And that's because the term conservation was introduced with the practices of conservation that apply or establish fortress conservation. And with fortress conservation, it means that you are not allowed to enter the space and you're not allowed to extract anything from that space. And in the traditional word, which means omangariyomel, which is the translation of the word conservation, omangariyomel means to take a little, to be mindful, to think about tomorrow, to think about the other people. But it describes a relationship between the individual and the ocean. And so the reason why they have this misconception of the word conservation when we ask them, when they're asked were there conservations in Palau, traditionally they would say no. It's because in their own way of view of the world, their own word of conservation means that you're managing the exchange and the relationship between human and the ocean. Whereas the fortress conservation, which is how they were introduced to the word conservation, limits the interaction and the relationship between the individual and the space. And so this is just another example of why it is so important that when we're teaching conservation in our indigenous homes, that we must prioritize the preservation of the language itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for that discussion on what you're doing in Palau in terms of teaching about conservation, and your emphasis on respect and the borrowing of knowledge, as well as the importance that there is no other way but to integrate language into the teaching of conservation, and very innovative approaches, not innovative for us as indigenous peoples. It, like you said, it has been done before in the past, and the work that you were doing is an example to those of us here from the region who are already carrying out similar work as you, and those who are yet to enter that space on ways or how they can go about teaching conservation by using indigenous language to teach conservation. Thank you for that. Moving on to our next panelist, Captain Aunofo. You work with whales, and you're a canoe boat captain, the first woman to become a licensed captain in Tonga. How important is the Tongan language in each of these areas, and what are some of the initiatives you are involved in to maintain the Tongan language?
Malo Apito. This is very important, and I think that's one of the highlights of why I'm joining the voyaging, because it's joining together multi culture, and not only the multicultural but the multi languages So it's sometimes we can see I'm on the Baka to run different languages and different culture, but it was a good things for refer it to me as Tongans. Tongan language gave me more power to build and connect more with different society through learning about the ideas, perspective, behavior that's maybe different from one own culture, but it's the language. It's how I feel when I'm on a traditional canoe. It's very important to play a big role because it's important it's important to my daily life to speak in my own language. Very important to my culture and define myself as Tongans and to who I am and where I come from and where I belong. And that's, I think, language, it touched my heart really deeply when I'm on the waka and sailing together with other nationalities on the boat. One of the things is to sustaining the Tongan language on the boat is very important for me on passing on the cultural knowledge from the elders to the young one. And that's what we've been doing. We have our own culture and we have our own traditional knowledge, but because it wasn't practiced, there was a fury. There's a fury of if we look at what Hawaii does now, that traditional knowledge was introducing from other country to them. For us in Tonga, we have our own traditional knowledge, but because it wasn't practicing, and that's one of my main focus now on bringing the worker in and then out of Tonga. It's reviving it and then tracing it, what it's need and too important to create these things so that the generation will learn from that one. And refer it to what Dr. Stewart was said before. I worked last year with the iwi from Te Kaha and Omayo is Tefano Apanui, and as well, this time I'm working with Ngati Wai at the north of New Zealand. What we did last year, this is the work that we're doing for conservations, is also we doing eDNA, like conservation scientific work. We collecting sample from Tongan's water through Commodex and all the way to New Zealand so that they can identify what is down there, citizens of the sea. As well, while we're sailing from New Zealand coming to north and while we're sailing from Tonga going south, also we are doing whales corridors. We following we're following the whales from New Zealand to Tonga, and then Tonga is the home for the whales. And that's where my other conservation is done, because when the people coming, it's not only to come and swim, but also we have to tell them about every part of the whales and why it's important for the ocean and why it's important to protect them, not only to come and swim because we need money, but at the same time, there is a way of protecting and there is a way of connection through our stories, through our language, through our, there is a lot of things we connect more with the whales. And also we have to, what I do, I also train other school, especially for primary school, to understand how important the reef, how important the sharks, how important all species are coming through to Tonga, so that it needs to be protected. It's not only because I'm sailing people, I'm taking out people because they love to sail, but they understand how the connection of our ancestors through voyaging, and then also similar to what the whales does. They're coming here to have baby and then pregnant here, they go back. So they know where they come from and then where they go back. It's the same how we voyage. And also it's the same with the language. The language, it starts more deeply to me when I use it on the waka. Also, crucial part of the nation's cultural heritage and sources of pride for my people. It's connected through the language. Also family, because when the whales coming here, we also call them family because the babies are born in Tonga. And then the protections is very high important here. So we understand the connections through that one. And collecting the data, we'll do it again this year. And with all the women's, and not only that, but to empower women. What we're doing as a captains to empower women so that we need more women in the industry because some of the stuff coming from a woman captains, it doesn't make sense to the men. It makes sense more to the women of how we feel and how we love and we want to protect along the way in my working area. And also Wales voyaging traditional knowledge. That's all about what I'm doing now is reviving this one, voyaging more because Tonga doesn't have a waka, but we share the waka between the, New Zealand, Iwi, Ngāti and the Tonga Voyaging Society. Also, we were studying like going to islands and collect all the tige, traditional knowledge from the elders, and then also the medium age and then a young generation. So to see and then compare that one, are they still remember something from like 3,000 years ago, what they still have on hand so that we can create something it's more easier to understand. And about also the language, some of our language, it's we use a new version now, but that's not the original one. But that's one of the things we want to go back to the original language, because if you knows how we live in Tonga, we speak in different words to the royal family, and then different words to the chief, and different words for us. So in that kind of things, there is a lot of things to be worked out of that one, but at the same time, a lot of information, and we did a lot of research to how we can do things better in Tonga. But language now, it's all coming back because most of the school, few school under the government, they teach English. There's no language, no Tongan language. So this now it's lately that's our connections through our people is through the language and what we know about the traditional knowledge and what we know about the weavings as well and the fishings and dancing also the culture. So we put together those things in what I'm doing on the waka and training more young one to understand why it's important to speak your own language and then pass on the knowledge from what it's been taught by our ancestors long time ago.
Thank you, Captain Onofo, on your discussion and on language as a form of identity and your connections and the work that you're doing with whale corridors and connecting your voyage to the voyages that whales also make. And looking at the work that you're doing, you are creating a very holistic approach in terms of language, culture, and conservation, and we applaud you with the work that you're doing and sharing with us this afternoon. Vinaka Bakalevu, Captain Onofo, So we move on to our next panelist from Rewa, Salnieta Kitalile. Sala, you have worked closely with your community on fisheries and traditional ecological knowledge. What would you like to see developed further to maintain Rewa language in relation to biocultural diversity and tech, as well as the work that you are doing with the Rewa think tank biodiversity committee? Naksal?
Nakamata. Okay, my work with the biodiversity committee is basically for Rewa, is to give advice around environmental issues that we have and some of the things that we can solve locally. So what I encourage most of the time is to use local knowledge and also the things which are available around different communities that we have in Rewa. And through my research, when I did my study at USP, it was a learning experience, learning and also relearning a lot of things, particularly with our language and also our knowledge. So when I went to different communities in Rewa, for example, when I went to Ra, one of the communities in Ra, I woke up one morning to the sound of children walking past the room and they were all talking in there. I just heard them saying, "Warai, tongkai vale." They were basically talking in my dialect. So I woke up and I thought, okay, there's some Rewan kids here. So I had to go and investigate how they got that our dialect up in Ra. And then I found out that 3 women married to that particular village. They were all from Rewa. And it was interesting to see the role of women taking our language across and teaching their children. So a lot of the nurturing that happens also comes through the mothers in the family, how they move language. And one thing that it is an advantage that a lot of children are learning different dialects and languages, particularly through their mothers and their fathers. But also sometimes they lose the diversity in the local dialects, particularly when I went to some parts of Fiji doing my research, a lot of the local names of species. And I asked them, for example, the fish. Can you identify how many kinds of parrotfish we have here? And people are able to identify all the different parrotfish. They just basically call them with a generic name, referring to them as ulabi. And then when I asked for specific names for the different species, it was the elders, it was the women or people who went out to catch those particular species. They were the ones who were able to give the local names. And some of the mothers even corrected some of their children when they used the names of the species from where their mother was. And they said, no, the local name here is this, but you learned that because you went fishing with me, and that's how you learned the name of that particular fish. And so in my line of work, it's always like I used to, everywhere I go, I emphasize it. Emphasize the use of our language and also the importance of the diversity in the dialects, because if you do not know the plant, if you do not know the animals which are around you, if you don't know the name of a species, you'll just ignore it, you know. For example, if you are sitting in a room full of people, you particularly drawn to someone who you know. So someone you'll know, or someone you speak the same dialect or language, usually drawn to that. So the same way with the different species in conservation, if we know the name of that particular resource or a species, we'll be drawn to protect it and look after it because we understand that it's in danger, or understand the relationship between that particular resource or that particular fish or plant with our people. And that's the importance of, that's where totems come in. Totems and how it links us to different other communities across Fiji or in the Pacific. We have certain totems which represent where we come from, how we are related, our kinship ties between other people, and the location where our ancestors traveled. For example, my totems, they all relate to plants and animals and fish, which are from the highlands in somewhere between Naitasiri and Rewa. So our people, we traveled from all the way up in the Vanua Nandumuda, and we came to settle in Reo. So some of the place names, the dialects, and also the relationship between plants and animals of our people, we are able to link it back to the people up in the highlands. And that's that creates the beauty of our culture, and also the beauty of our language, because it connects a lot of people, and it connects a lot of knowledge and wisdom around resource management and conservation. And a lot of things, a lot of work that I do in Rewa is centered around that. Another example I can give is an example of relearning the language. So I went to do work on the conservation of management of mangroves in one part of Rewa. So while I was explaining to them, translating the scientific, making the science make sense for my people. So when I was translating the parts of the mangrove, and I was explaining to them how the mangroves breathe and how they capture carbon from the atmosphere. And then they were giving me the local names of the parts of the tree. When I told them the roots, if you cover the roots of the mangrove, the butt roots, which have these little eyes looking at you, you cover that, you'll kill the tree. And they said, what? And they said, that's the mbukalo. And I asked them, what's the mbukalo? Mbukalo is the butt root that shoots out of the different mangrove trees. And I said, oh, so that's where Nambukalo Creek, the name in Suva, comes from. They said, yes. Okay, and there's another river called Wainimbokasi River. And then some people say, okay, in our language, Mbokasi is a variety of breadfruit, a variety of breadfruit which used to be found along that river. That's why we call Wainimbokasi. And so that's the beauty. I'm saying beauty all the time because I'm excited in learning this, and also learning not only from the elders who are there to give us direction and wisdom, but I also learn from my peers who have learned from their elders, and they share that knowledge across. So in the Pacific, and also when we have different workshops and things, when we learn from our peers, that's horizontal transmission of knowledge. Whereas if we learn from our elders, that's basically vertical transmission of knowledge. We learn the same thing, but from different directions. So yes, that's the line of work, and how important language is to what I do. Naka.
Nakabakalebu Sala, even I myself, and I'm sure the participants as well and the other panelists, we're sort of feeling an excitement in the direction that the discussion is taking with all the information that we are receiving. And as Sal had mentioned, in terms of her research, we are learning and relearning as well with them on this journey that we are taking place this afternoon in this session. Thank you so much, Sala, for your discussion on the role of women as well, and how important the role of women is in terms of language and conservation. And it ties in with what Captain Onofo had talked about of her work in terms of women, empowerment of women, and you talking about the role of women in a room full of women. Sala, for this discussion. We will move on to Dr. Ramari. A question on Dr. Ramari. There are many nuances in Terra Maori and Iwi have different terms for different species. Could you elaborate on that and share some of your thoughts around the risks of standardization?
Kia ora. Firstly, I agree with Anne, the integration is a challenge. Because of the colonized views, academics find it difficult to understand that we consist of many, many tribes or many, many hapu, and we have slightly different views of species and how our people historically interacted with them. And so there's a tendency to want to harvest Indigenous knowledge without standing back and having that respect and integrating to achieve that. I also myself had to grapple with conservation, the concept of conservation, because it excludes me and my kinship ties. Not only that, I grew up to understand that I was the tainer, the younger, not the elder. So that is where one of the most important values of our people was always respect. And I'd like to just mention, so today what happens is a lot of academics and even our own people will go to the dictionary. If it's in, with the idea that if it's in the dictionary, it must be correct. But I'm having a real struggle with some of them. And the best dictionary that people go to is William Williams, who published the first edition of Williams' Dictionary in 1844. And then by the fifth edition in 1917, his grandson alluded to the problem of assimilating the material right back then. And that material often, and when it relates to species, the person they interviewed often gave an example of a species that fits in with that term. And if I can think of some for myself, the Department of Conservation labelled the pilot whale upukohue. It is correct in one way, in that upukohue is an upukohue, but it belongs to a large group of animals which fit into toothed whales. So this is my problem. So now everybody thinks the pilot whale's name is upukohue, and the name for the pilot whale has slowly disappeared. Upukohue is describing the toothed whales. And so for us to teach that, we need to go back to those values of how species interacted with our people, their behavior, and those other things that I mentioned earlier, because I agree with Norfor that, pardon me, that it's not just about whales. Indigenous thinking for me is, I'm always looking for the similarities. And why is that? I think some of it's got to do, especially seems though whales has come up as the topic, and it is, I often get put in the whale box. Kawe ka moana is whales belong to the lineage of fishes. So straight away, you're looking for fishes that may be similar to a whale species. And just to touch on some examples, if I can think of a couple. Mango taiare is a whale whose behavior and looks resemble a shark. And it's the pygmy sperm whale. And the term actually relates to the fact that it's able to repel or repulse, because it's the only it's a species that uses inking like a squid to escape predators. So this is how Indigenous thinking works, and to get inside that, you have to go much deeper. Another example which has popped up in some of the scientists' papers is that ihe, or ihe, there is the term they're using, ihe. For me, it is ihe. Again, to do with the lineage of fishes. Ihe is the garfishes or the needlefishes, those fishes with little wee small snouts. And by the way, these terms all come out of the Pacific, so there are clues there. But when someone changes it to Ihe and says, and uses that to describe all dolphins that end up in the on the university table for a necropsy. That straight away is meaning that we're going to lose all the other terms that relate to that. Ihe, as I said, the garfish describes one or two species of beaked whales, not the whole lot, only one or two, because the description came from when in the old days there were no diggers, no bulldozers to bury things like they do today. We don't get to see the skeletons of many things today because the whales are buried. But in the days when I was young, before the Marine Mammals Protection Act in 1978, we used to see the separation of carcasses, and we would see these remarkable skeletal features emerge. And they're all different because of the different species. And I learned all the beaked whales, which is why I became an expert in them eventually. Why? Because they were there in front of me. That was my classroom. And Ihe described certain ones, and it described the ones with extremely fine snouts and long, whereas collectively the group had a different name, et cetera, et cetera. So the point I'm trying to make is we have to go much deeper for our own people to recapture it, because it is practitioner knowledge. And when the practice ceased, because of, in many cases, because of conservation reasons, the language went out the window with it. And I'm trying to hang on to many of those things. And I have to tell you, lots of them here in Aotearoa are extinct. I'm just no longer hearing them. And so when people standardize it, it means that those in a particular tribal coastal area who used to use a different term, their younger generation is starting to use the one that everybody else is using. And so the old one is lost. I don't know if I'm making this clear or not, but I agree with a lot that has been said by the former panelists. I certainly do. And I'm not saying that I don't think that we can solve this. I think I'm beginning to think that maybe I'm not a linguist, so maybe I should be sitting down with a linguist to maybe capture some of these examples and illustrate them, which is how I do it in my wānanga. I'll show a particular whale, and then I'll show a fish that it looks like and the term that relates to both of them, and it works. It's immediate, because you need some visual and oral capability. And that's the amazing thing about the waka getting out there on the moana and doing it. I tried to do that a long time ago in the early 70s when I first went to the Pacific, but the humpback whales had disappeared pretty much. We didn't know what had caused it. And of course, in more recent years, we learned about the Russian slaughter that went through our regions. So I was part of a short, participating in a documentary filmed in Fiordland in the southern part of Aotearoa. And the reason why I was there was because I had visited the East Australian humpback up in Hervey Bay in Queensland earlier in the season when the cow-calf pairs were there. Why? Because I wanted to understand abundance, because that population appears to have recovered very, very well. And then a couple of months later, I'm in the fjords anticipating the arrival. A fairly large percentage of them cross over to Aotearoa. They don't just go straight south. And I was anticipating that. And I have to say, it's heartbreaking when someone doesn't consult and calls that whale Paikea's whale, when I know that whale's not Paikea's whale. If anything, it's Maui's whale, because he came from the west. So Paikea's whale came from the east, and that is the Oceania humpback whale. So I've just given you an example of how I run into these things. So you have to know your species and their distribution very, very well in order to pick up on these things. So the East Australian whale is definitely not Paikea's whale, because sometimes we refer to species using an honorific term. Another example in Mairohe is Tutarakauika, because we're acknowledging the tipuna whale, another whale rider called Te Tahi o Tarangi, and that was his whale. It was a killer whale. So sometimes when the killer whales came through, the old people used to refer to them as Tutarakauika because that's what he named that whale. But it also has another name, which is kake, which was the commonest term. There are others. So I hope I'm helping here to proceed with this cautiously, because once it's set in concrete, we've got a problem. We could lose more language than what we're trying to save. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Dr. Ramari, for that riveting conversation on language in conservation and the dangers and challenges of standardization of terms, not only for whales but for all species, and for us in the region, especially through our schools, where there are standard languages that are used that is slightly different from other dialects or languages. For example, here in Fiji, that is a danger that is present or could already be present in our different communities, where words, the common words, are now being used instead of the terms in that particular language or dialect. So thank you for highlighting that and for motivating us to know more and read more. And yes, we definitely have learned more about whales today. Very interesting work that you're doing, Dr. Ramari. Thank you. And I know that it's taking a while, but I hope that the conversation that's happening is holding your attention, and you will not worry too much about the time that is moving forward around the conversation that's happening. And however, I would like to pose a few more questions, and then just one more question. If one or two of the panelists can answer, as time will also be catching up on us, so that we can allow our participants to time to ask questions and have a conversation with our panelists. If Salniata and any other panelists would like to answer this question. I will be referring to a previous session of this webinar series where Dr. Winifred Nainoda, also from the province of Rewa, was a panelist, and she mentioned that some words in indigenous languages of the Pacific have lost their meaning when translated to French or English. What is I know that this was touched a bit by the other some of the panelists, but if you could discuss more on this, and if you have had any specific experiences with regard to this issue. What is your experience with regard to the statement that I have just mentioned? Naka Sala?
Thank you, Mother. I was hoping you're going to ask someone else. But anyway, yes, I wrote my thesis in English, and it was a struggle to translate most of the terms that we use in the Fijian language into English, particularly because the value that comes with the particular words that we use in our language loses its meaning when it goes to English. For example, when we talk about Vimarurui. Vimarurui is a very important term in the Fijian language. So if I go to a particular village and the people there, When I say that in the English word, it loses its meaning. But in the Fijian word, it basically means that people accept you as their own and they look after you. And it's a very long a translation that you're trying to make people understand the value that comes behind our language. Because our culture and our language, it comes with the different values that we share, not only with the people that we see around us, but also our younger generation. So a lot of, if we listen to a lot of younger people who are speaking nowadays, they have lost the respect and also the way they speak formally, and also in terms of the use of our language, translating that whatever they have from English into Fijian. They do the basic direct translation. They lose the meaning. Sorry, from Fijian to English. They lose the meaning behind our culture. They disrespect our people and our culture. Sometimes when they have direct translation, they give the wrong impression of our people. And that's something that is of some sort of challenge. And the way around it is basically to train up the younger generation on how to show respect, how to speak not only proper in our language and dialects, but also to instill in them the different values that come with learning our different languages. And I believe that's a very important step forward for us. And in my line of work, like what Anne mentioned, that it's respect, it's humility, and only then will you be able to embody yourself, to go into a different community and learn the culture, the language, and also the traditions behind the conservation work or management work, which occurs in different parts of your country, not only in Fiji, but all across the Pacific. And a lot of times, in a lot of places that I've been to, particularly when I'm facilitating the transmission of knowledge between the elders and the younger generation, who come together to sit in a room and exchange their knowledge and their ideas. And while they're asking questions about the different species, or sometimes they they give examples and they ask questions like, this particular fish, it comes all the way up the river and it gives birth here. We find it during this season, and then after that, and then it lives in the sea. How come we find it here? And then we have to explain to them the life cycles. Although they know it, they understand it in their within their fishing culture and everything, because sometimes within that migration of fish and everything, they harvest some of those fish and they have names for them. So someone who comes with a background of, particularly the younger generation, if they have a strong background in science, if they have a background in science or chemistry, all that, if they're able to, they understand their language and their culture well, they'll be able to be a bridge. Be a bridge to be able to link our people with the people outside our culture, and the people from outside our culture to learn what they are ignorant of, things that we take for granted. Even though we know it, we believe everyone else knows. We just think everyone else should understand this. When we say tambo, oh yeah, everyone in the world knows what tambo is, but they don't. They don't, because we do not tell them. And sometimes we say, what use is it to them? It's because someone who's listening from anywhere around the world, they'll take that context that you translate and they'll use it, misappropriate that particular knowledge or whatever you've translated incorrectly. So in order to do that, you need to listen to your elders, learn from them, and be humble, and just continue to learn, relearn, and help people who are in need of direction, to pull them back and to teach them, guide them and inspire them to learn our languages and our dialects, and to take our conservation and management in the right direction. Naka.
Nakavali Sala for that insightful conversation and discussion on words losing their meaning when translated into English through your own experiences. I now open the floor for questions to our participants. You can put up your questions in the chat, or you can if Harriet, if if they're able to use their audio, would they be able to do that as well? But in the meantime, throughout this conversation that we're having this afternoon, very important conversation, we see how crucial, how important it is of language in conservation and the dangers and challenges, and we realize that. There are dangers and challenges that's imminent to us here in the Pacific, especially as per the conversation that Dr. Ramari Aunofo, Anne, and Sala are sharing with us today. Participants, if you would like to ask questions to the panelists, you can turn on your microphones to ask your questions. In the meantime, while our participants are mulling around issues or questions they want to ask our panelists, there are some recurring words that are taking place or happening in this conversation, words like respect, identity, sustainability, integration, and these exemplify the importance of language and conservation, and our panelists have certainly highlighted that it is indeed an issue that needs to be addressed and looked at, and language needs to be revitalized in our communities so that we can learn and relearn, as Salah had mentioned, the different issues or the different contexts of species, not only in terms of the terms for species, as Dr. Ramari has mentioned, but to know the connections they have between us and the environment and conservation and the concept of conservation as well. In the meantime, would just like to pose a question
Nada,
to, yes,
and Anne has her hand up.
yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, I was just going to direct the question to Anne, but go ahead, Anne.
I
Just read
just
my
wanted
mind.
to kind of take just share a little bit more around the importance of language. I mean, and no one in this group right now doesn't understand the value of that, but I feel that in my experience in teaching environmental studies or conservation to young people, I find that the two different spectrum, one in the Western science, teaches the students to be very technical, and they develop a strong sense of curiosity and while still maintaining that technicality around investigation. On the other hand, teaching conservation through the eyes and the ways of indigenous people and their relationship to the natural world doesn't just teach about the importance of biodiversity or of a functioning ecosystem, but it has a way of softening the heart. It teaches the students to have a more tender view towards the natural world around them. And I think those are important, both important things that we need to teach the young people, to understand the world in a way where they can project what will happen in the future when they recognize the imbalance in the ecosystem. But it is also important that they can relate that the loss of such a species or an imbalance in this ecosystem, how does that translate to the change in the way that they live their lives and how they interact with the natural world, including the practices, the traditional and cultural practices that they are afforded or what will be taken away from them. And so I feel that those are both a very important way of teaching and learning that builds a more comprehensive way of understanding and relating to the environment. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Well, it looks like there's no questions, so I'm going to go ahead and oh, there's somebody. There was a question in the chat by Fiona, and this is also something you know, I've been kind of mulling around. Is how do we? How, you know, Dr. Ramari talked about, you know, maybe we need some linguists, and so we've had a few sessions as part of there's something called the Pacific Island Roundtable on Nature Conservation, and MADA is part of that. And we've had a session with linguists, but we had a hard time getting the conservationists in. And so how do we, you know, one of the issues is beyond the discussion we've been having is the issue around academics or different fields of you know, kind of Western science disciplines, I guess, and how do we get linguists and conservationists to talk to each other, but also with, you know, indigenous cultural experts and harvesters, or, you know, like your work with the fishers with the ocean, and Sala's also been working with fishers, and then Aunofo's experience working with whales and navigation at the same time, you know, bringing those different practices together. Because often everything is just so cut up and siloed. So, you know, I'm just kind of following up on that question, and maybe there's some linguists here, I know, on this who are participating. You know, maybe what are your ideas on that, and what are the ideas of the panelists as well on how to bring things closer together. So that's a question I just picked up on the chat, but I also wanted to say, Anne, I really love your concept of borrowing knowledge, and I think that's such a great way of talking about it, and also the term that you use in Palau to talk about conservation, which is so much more meaningful. But this idea of borrowing, I think, is so important because it implies that it's not yours to take, right? You're just you're asking permission, and in the process of borrowing, you're acknowledging that it really belongs to someone else. And I think that's such a key concept and or way of looking at it that's really meaningful. And I think using that term can actually really shift the way people, currently a lot of researchers do things, or and whether it's indigenous researchers who've been so taught Western type of research, or outside researchers, it's really problematic around traditional knowledge, and it can be so extractive. And so I think that's such a great term. Anyway, so the question is around linguists and conservationists and language, language experts in place, right? So if anyone wants to have a crack at that.
I'll take a crack at it, but I really, at least it's like I said it earlier, I don't see how you can do effective conservation without merging the two worlds together. In many of our Pacific islands, we have known kinship towards the animals in the ocean, or the plants, the trees, or the birds in the forest. So there's a lot of relationship between plants and animals that can only be known if you understand the stories of the land or the ocean. And those relationship provides insightful management knowledge that are needed for effective conservation. For instance, if like in our culture, or in our oral history, it places a kinship between the turtle and a megapode, a bird, and how they support one another in the survivability of their offsprings and hatchlings. That in itself gives a pathway to the protection of those species. Both of them are endangered, by the way, listed at IUCN endangered species list. If you do not recognize the relationship between those two species so that you develop management approach that considers both species, then it is an ineffective management approach, because then you would be protecting one species, leaving behind the other one, when the two species depend on one another for their survival and sustain and their lives. So that's why it's such an important. I don't know how you cannot bring the two worlds together to be successful. Yeah, I guess my.
Thank you, Anne, for that, for taking a crack at that question, and addressing and talking about how important that you cannot separate them, but they need to be integrated. We have a couple of questions on the chat. Before we round off, we'll try to address them before our time is up. There's a question from Elilai in terms of biocultural effects, climate change, such as the changes in harvesting techniques for plants used in traditional intake or indigenous medicine. How important is documentation and preservation of specific species and names in the local languages, dialects, for future generations to keep their relation to place despite development and change? If any of the panelists would like to answer this question.
Sorry,
Yes, Anne,
speaking.
yes,
It's
go
just
ahead, Anne.
it's an issue that's dear to my heart, but yes, documentation is so important. Um, um, but even more important is that we teach the practice, the actual practice. I know from a personal experience that when I'm learning from the elders about medicine, if I write it down on a notebook, I'll forget it. And I'd have to keep referring to that notebook to remember. But if I follow them on a trail in a forest and I pick the medicine as they're telling me, I'll never forget it. I'll learn it once and retain it forever. So that's the difference. And it is the kind of knowledge that requires us understanding the forest and understanding the plants, understanding the relationship between the plants. And knowing this, knowing where they are, because we understand the kind of plants that they are and what forest habitat they want to be within, allows us to protect them as well. Because if we don't know where they are, what they look like, it's so easy for us to just watch development, erase them from the places that they belong without recognition. And that's why it's so important that we document, but we also teach the actual practice if we're going to be able to save the plants and the culture of traditional healing. They go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for addressing that question. There are two other questions that are on the chat since you're currently, if you can continue to answer those two questions. From Jason. Jason, he runs an environmental education program, and like you, Anne, he tries to harmonize the learning programs between the technical, the science, and the indigenous knowledge because he finds that both are needed to reinforce our understanding. Or basically, he's just adding on to what you were saying. Eleanor is asking about the issues with regard to language and its use for effective conservation. Her question is it taught in primary or secondary schools? And if it's not, should these important topics be introduced in existing school curriculums?
So, what our longest struggle was how to integrate the studies into the school in Palau. And what we learned was they already have a very well-defined way of teaching and the types of materials that they want to use. So what we had to be creative and design a program that would allow us to have a chance in shaping the students' way of learning science without interrupting the very well-defined and not as simple to change the framework. So we studied the science framework for Palau, and then we developed a curriculum that ensures that we reach the learning target that they're looking for. But then we say they must come out to the ocean. They must come out to the forest to learn this. And so today particular grades in primary school are required to study with us in the ocean or in the forest. And then that way they can maintain what they're supposed to maintain in the education system without interruption. And we give them an opportunity to have the children apply the science that they're learning in the classroom out in the ocean and in the forest. So we can reinforce the science curriculum that they're teaching and learning in the schools. So being a little bit creative around those. But really, I applaud you for already starting and to think about these kinds of things. And I wish you luck. And I'm right here if you need any support. I'll be glad to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne, for sharing those thoughts with us. If the members of the panel could answer this, or linguists in the room would like to address Ashleen's question. Ashleen is talking about translation as being problematic, relating to what Salnietta and Dr. Ramari had addressed, and sometimes lead to imbalances in meaning. Is how certain concepts or objects are translated. In some cases, the translation might be too literal, which can distort the intended meaning. So she's curious, how can we preserve and maintain the value of a word or concept through translation without losing its cultural or contextual depth? If Salniata and Dr. Ramara to expand on this discussion, as well as Anne and Onofo, if you would like to add on.
Does anyone want to go first?
Kia ora, that's Ramari here. I'm having some internet issues. So I'm sorry, I don't really have an answer for that. That's really what I'm grappling with. In fact, you've put it very succinctly. And I agree with Anne, and thank you, Anne, for picking up the challenge of answering some of these. Let me say that Anne touched on the importance of the stories. I learned through stories. And when I went to school, I discovered that those stories were too fantastic or not relevant to life at the time. Instead, I learned Hey Diddle Diddle, The Cat and the Fiddle, and Humpty Dumpty, which had no relevance to me at all. However, I learned about heroes and their feats. And so it gave me direction in my life. But also, when capturing these meanings, we have to somehow try and translate it in a way that it doesn't lose that integrity that relates to the story or the description of the animal or the relationship, the cultural relationship. That's the best I can do, I'm afraid. I'm still grappling with this problem myself, and so I don't have any straight answers, but certainly it's a very relevant question for this forum. Kia ora.
Thank you, Dr. Ramari. And Ashleen, hope that answers your question. And Sala can add on, if you could add on as also as an expansion from Dr. Ramari to answer Mela's question, where he's looking at it not from a linguistic perspective, but from a species perspective, in how how can we keep maintaining the importance of species for our future generations as well? These two are looking at what are the possible solutions, but from from a species perspective and from a linguistic perspective. Salniata, please.
Mother, for the hard question, but I'll pick up the challenge. Yes. So,
Thank you.
Okay. I think a lot of us have watched National Geographic and all these different documentaries that we have in the English language. So we can empower our youth, we can empower the next generation by giving them projects. By going to communities. And documenting the knowledge which is already there, species to our culture, and also, more importantly, in our different languages and dialects. Because if our language, it maintains that the the integrity of our language and also the value of the different species to our people. And if we're using our language to document the different species which are important to us, that basically empowers people, especially the youth, because they're learning in translating from the Fijian or whatever language they are documenting into the English language. So we can always try our best to translate into the English language or French, but at the end of the day, documenting using videos and voice recordings of the language that we have and of the different species or environmental terms that we use, it doesn't necessarily, lose its meaning, but it empowers our people and it gives us a record of our own language and dialects and knowledge of our elders. And yes, I think that's one of the ways forward. And I would agree with Anne in field learning experiences. A lot of people that work in offices nowadays, they're very disconnected from not only the environment, but also their languages. And they're very disrespectful of the people that live in communities. People in communities hold a lot of information, knowledge, and wisdom, and they're able to teach us so much. Just if we take a step out of our comfort zone and walk into a community with humility to go and learn and capture some of the stories, the information, rich information that they're able to give you. And it doesn't become extractive, particularly if you are a trained local taxonomist or biologist. You are giving back to your community by giving them the knowledge that you learn from school. That a lot of us, gone are the days where we say traditional knowledge versus science. Now we have to accept that they are the same. They speak the same, different languages, but they talk about the same thing. So we have to take ownership of that, that our knowledge, some people that I've come across, they say, science is a subset of our traditional or indigenous knowledge. And when they said that, and I thought, okay, so why not? Not only not thinking that we're superior, but we are all humans. We are all humans living on Earth, and we have our own knowledge systems and languages to protect the environment. So why not use that that feeling of empowerment to help? And because we have technology, we are moving forward in a lot of children, they become disconnected because they're on the phone. Why not give them a project? For example, my kids, I teach them about medicinal plants. I make them go outside and count the number of trees they can name in their own dialect or in their own language. And I make them take photos of them or draw them. That's a way of teaching them. And it's not only empowered them, but it's encouraged them to go and be connected to the environment. And that's an important step that we need to push our youth, push the children out of their comfort zone and out away from the way they use the technology, to use it for a purpose that can help us protect our knowledge and our language. I think that's my answer to the question. Naka.
Nakabali bu Sala for those practical solutions, possible solutions that we can carry out. We have a final question or a discussion from Rajan. Rajan, if you would like to add on to the discussion on what Ashlyn and Melasa have asked.
Vinaka Mada, and thank you to the presenters for such a wonderful range of topics covered and just a very technical way to think of translation. One thing which I see in practically missing most of the time, translation is a process. When we translate something from one language into English, the back translation doesn't happen. So we need to do back translation. Give that English translated version to somebody in the community who knows that language, the original language and English, and ask him to do back translation. And then we should see how much correlation is there between the original document and the back translation. That will give an idea to whoever is doing research or producing documents to see if my translation has gone way beyond what was said in the original language, or is it close to that. The other thing is, we should not always try to translate some of the indigenous words. We keep it as it is. In one of the previous webinars we had when we were talking about language and media, and one of the editors from, I think, from Cook Island said, when I do it in Cook Island Maori and sometimes I write in English, I use the indigenous words and it connects very well with the people. Now, I know somewhere the question arises, then how do others? So we are talking about younger generation here, children here. We can do some simple things. While we at one level are documenting, archiving the video, the audio in repositories or audio recordings here and there, we should start with some very simple things which has worked always. Have a picture book where we have pictures of this flora and fauna with the indigenous name, and maybe give additional information which part of Fiji it originates from, other things. And then we start using this indigenous name in the mainstream media and education. And for instance, words like mana in Fijian, it's very hard to translate in English. But through papers written by like late Professor Tupeni Mbaba and Ipeli, we now use mana as a accepted word in English. And when we read that, it's more easier to connect with the connotation and denotation of that word rather than somebody trying to break that word into English. So just a technical input from my side. Vinaka.
Nakapakalebu, Rajesh, for that linguistic perspective and solutions to the challenges that that has evolved from this conversation. Pinaka, we have come to the end of our webinar on language matters in the Pacific, Indigenous languages and conservation in the Pacific. I would like to thank each and every panelist for their invaluable, insightful, very interesting, and thought-provoking discussions that they have shared with us today. There is also a lot of discussion that is being generated on the chat, and thank you to the panelists, Dr. Ramari, Anne, Salanieta, and Captain Aunofo, for availing yourselves to be part of this session. And we cannot exemplify how much this has brought out a lot of conversation and will generate a lot of conversation and collaboration between linguists and conservationists, and I think particularly here at USP. Again, Vinaka Bakalebu, for your participation. Thank you to the participants as well for logging into our session and engaging in the conversation and listening to what is being shared. And we hope that the message will go beyond this platform, that you will take what you have learned, what you're willing to learn, these solutions to your community and to the work that you're currently carrying out in the Pacific. Pinaka Bakalebu, and I'll hand it over to Harriet to end this session for us.
Minakamata. Thank you everyone for attending our last seminar of the semester. Thank you to the panelists. The questions were fantastic. The discussion, I had chills at points just then. And I think I'm going to be going back and looking at some parts of the recording because I couldn't write fast enough. We will put the recording up on our YouTube channel as well, so you can catch it later or share it with people if you would like. Minaka Vaka level, and that is all for today. Thank you.